Hi, ladies. So, we are here with chapter 3 of The Wounded Heart. This chapter is called Deflection, the Clash with Contempt. So, it starts out with Allender saying that individuals who have been sexually abused face a spiritual battle against evil. And again, remember, we visited this concept of sin in the last chapter, and we summarized it as feeling separate or disconnected from a sense of love or connection to the greater good, humanity, the universe. Many people say God. So this feeling of disconnect is what we're referring to as sin, because this is what leads people to do things that are not out of love. And so Allender says that people who have been sexually abused, they face a battle against this feeling, and that they often feel justified in the behaviors that this sin causes, because it's easy to say, okay, well, life is difficult, so of course the way that I'm acting makes sense right now, which is completely true. And he goes on to say that this sense of separation, this sense of ego, this sense of I've got it and I don't need anyone, I can handle this on my own, seems rational when you place it in context with what people have been through. Of course, they're hardened to life. Of course, they feel that they have to be tough and do it themselves. Of course, they feel like they have to use their brain to get through these situations and figure out an answer. And he says that the call to humility and sacrifice actually feels absurd to us, because why would I make myself vulnerable? Why would I bring myself to the level of trusting people again and having the humility of letting someone see me in all of my perceived flaws, all of my weaknesses? Why would I do that again? That seems ridiculous. He says that recognizing the blurred lines here and the justification of why we act the way that we act is crucial in moving forward with this book, because contempt and shame are intertwined in this struggle of I've got it, I don't need anyone, I'm separate from everyone else. So he talks about what contempt actually is. He says it's the manifestation of negative self-talk and dismissive reactions, especially towards criticism. So this is our way of shielding ourselves from the pain of shame. And that while legitimate shame can actually reveal the things that we need to work on about ourselves, contempt, on the other hand, is what prevents us from facing these things that we need to work on. We don't want anyone else to see us in this weakened state, especially not someone that we perceive as our creator, an authority figure. We don't want anyone to think that we're unworthy of love. And so when we turn to this contempt, this is our way of making sure that shame doesn't have to be addressed. It doesn't have to be looked at. It doesn't have to be something that we scrutinize or go up against. He says that this is really important to understand, because it really starts to dig into the impact that sexual abuse can have on someone's life. Contempt exists on a continuum with varying degrees of severity. So on the side of very severe contempt, we have this being exhibited through desires to harm yourself or harm others, which reflects a profound internal battle with self-loathing and resentment, which is understandable due to the amount of shame that someone has internalized, especially after being abused. And this level of contempt often leads to self-destructive behaviors. A lot of times people can't even explain why they feel the urge to do these things. It just takes them over. Then we go down the continuum to moderately severe contempt. This is characterized by violent fantasies or violent thoughts. A lot of times people will say intrusive thoughts. This illustrates an escape from pain, an escape from shame, through imaginary revenge or imaginary degradation of self or others. And this actually leads the individual to cope with their trauma through what is actually unhealthy outlets. Then we have mildly severe contempt, which is common in a lot of people through self-critical behaviors, Individuals will harshly evaluate their own performance or others' performances, and this ultimately fosters a cycle of guilt and shaming that seriously impacts personal growth and the ability to have close personal relationships. Then we have the least severe contempt as outlined in this particular book, which is the inability to accept compliments. And this reflects deeper issues of self-worth, where someone's fear of having intimacy leads to a sense of self-sabotage, which is ultimately the avoidance of connection with another individual. The author actually does give several examples on this continuum of severity of contempt, which are mildly graphic in nature, but they are helpful in understanding what these levels of contempt may look like in real life. Allender then goes on to discuss the functions of contempt and why this may manifest in someone's life, especially after having been through sexual abuse. The first purpose that contempt could serve would be to diminish feelings of shame. So in order to not feel that shame and not feel that vulnerability, we can attack ourselves or attack others. And this helps us to not feel so powerless. At least we have control over something. It can deaden your longings, so prevent you from feeling a sense of yearning for closeness. It prevents you from having to access your deep emotional desires, especially those related to intimacy, which means that we can then sidestep any painful memories of past abuse that may come up. Contempt also, I mentioned this briefly a moment ago, it creates a false sense of agency in what can feel like a chaotic life. So this gives the person a narrative to be able to explain their suffering and maintain a semblance of power when they have often felt powerless or like they don't have control of what's going on around them. This is especially exhibited in that hyper-criticism that we talked about before. Contempt also distorts the real problem so that we don't have to face it. So it shifts the focus from, let's look at this vulnerability, let's look at this sense of disconnect that has manifested in our life, let's look at these internalized feelings of I'm not worthy of love because this happened to me. We don't have to face that feeling of brokenness. It allows us to shift the focus to an external blame. Something is wrong with someone or something around us, or our appearance, or our routines, or the way that we're performing it to some degree. And this actually prevents us from having a deeper sense of self-reflection, which in turn keeps us from being accountable and having that self-accountability that really comes with being initiated into competent adulthood and being able to regulate our own emotions. So it's a real problem here. Contempt acts as both a shield and a deflection. It complicates relationships. It complicates the healing process for survivors. But it's really important to understand the effects that it actually has on the individual, because it's only through understanding why we do these things, why we push others away, why it's difficult to accept compliments, why we are so hard on ourselves, why the inner critic has stepped in and taken over our thoughts, because this will help us in our journey toward restoration, because it's only through facing these habits that we've formed that we can begin to form authentic connections with ourselves and in turn with others. So this is a very self-reflective chapter. I'm going to post some journal prompts in the chat that you can look at as we are discussing this relationship that we have with contempt of ourselves and contempt of others. If you do have any questions, especially regarding the context that we're talking about contempt with here, feel free to reach out in the chat. You can also email me or send me a DM anytime. And if anything feels difficult or memories come up, things that are particularly difficult for you, again, I want to reiterate, you do not have to keep going on this, but if you feel that you do want to, again, reach out. You're not alone. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to let me know before we move forward to the next chapter.